Sloane Whitfield placed the termination letter on the table and looked across at the man in the gray work shirt. Reed Calloway did not speak. She read the line aloud. 17 late arrivals in 4 months. He offered no explanation. He offered no apology. He nodded once, rose from his chair, and walked out. Gerald Price stood waiting in the hallway, arms folded, a faint smile on his face. That evening at her mother's kitchen table, Judith poured tea and brought up the new neighbor. "He's very kind," she said. "Fixed the roof for me. Wouldn't accept a single dollar." Sloane asked his name. Judith said Reed. If a quiet story about a quiet man draws you in, stay with it. The kind ones rarely raise their voices, and that is precisely why their stories are worth hearing all the way to the end. 5 months before that letter was signed, a moving truck the color of dust pulled up outside a small clapboard house on Maple Bend Road on the quiet northern edge of Knoxville, Tennessee. The truck was rented. The boxes were few. A girl of about 8 with 2 long braids and serious brown eyes climbed down from the passenger side and looked up at the oak trees lining the street. "Is this it, Dad?" she asked. Reed Calloway closed the driver's door and came around. "This is it, Nora." He had chosen the house for 2 reasons. It was the least expensive one in the school district he needed, and the porch faced east so the kitchen would catch the morning light. After his wife passed, small details like that had taken on a weight he could not entirely put into words. Across the low picket fence, a woman in a faded sun hat was kneeling beside a bed of late tomatoes. She straightened when she noticed them, brushed the soil from her gloves, and raised her hand. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Judith Whitfield." Reed lifted a hand in return. "Reed, and this is Nora." "Well," Judith said, smiling at the girl, "I have far too many tomatoes. If you eat them, they're yours." That was how it began, quietly, the way most real things do. 3 weeks later, Reed submitted an application at Whitfield Logistics, a regional distribution company operating out of a long warehouse off the freeway. Under previous employment, he wrote 3 short lines that explained almost nothing. Trudy Bascom, the shift manager, glanced through it, observed him during the floor walkthrough, and offered him the position before lunch. She told her husband that night that the new hire understood pallet flow better than anyone she had ever interviewed, and she could not figure out why he was applying for an entry-level shift. Reed's mornings began at 5:30. He fried 2 eggs, packed Nora's lunch, and at 6:15 buckled her into the back of his old gray sedan and drove 40 minutes northwest to Oak Ridge, where the regional gifted program met in a low brick building behind a Methodist church. By the time he dropped her off, hugged her at the gate, and drove back through morning traffic, he arrived at the Whitfield warehouse at 7:50. The shift started at 7:30. On his best days, he was 20 minutes late. He never complained. He never explained. He simply worked through his lunch break and stayed after his shift ended. In the glass tower across town, Sloane Whitfield sat through her 9th board meeting since her father's funeral. Gerald Price, who had served as her father's chief operating officer for 12 years, was reading from a clipboard about workforce discipline. The numbers, he said, had slipped since the leadership transition. He did not look at her when he said it. He did not need to. Sloane gripped her pen and said nothing. Late one Thursday, on her first walking tour of the floor, she passed through the loading bay and stopped without quite knowing why. A man in a gray shirt was repositioning a row of pallets, working alone with the kind of unhurried patience that made it look effortless. The flow of the aisle had shifted. She could see it. Faster picks, shorter walks. Gerald appeared at her side. "Don't get distracted, Sloane. The contracts are upstairs." She let him lead her away. She glanced back once. Reed never looked up. On Monday morning, an email went out under Gerald's name to every warehouse employee. 0 tolerance late arrival policy. 3 instances would trigger a formal disciplinary review. 5 would mean termination. There were no exceptions for personal circumstances, no consideration of family situations, no accommodation for educational obligations. Several staff members read it twice and went quiet for the rest of the morning. Trudy read it twice in her office, then walked down the hall to Sloane's floor. She had never once requested a meeting with a CEO before. She had worked at Whitfield Logistics for 22 years, since the late William Whitfield was still on the floor in shirt sleeves checking pallet counts himself. The assistant on the executive floor was polite. She told Trudy that Miss Whitfield was in budget reviews until 5 and that all requests were to go through the COO's office. Trudy left a note anyway. It vanished by the following morning. Sloane never saw it. Down in the warehouse, Reed kept working. He noticed the new policy and did not change his routine, because his routine had been built around the one fact in his life that could not be shifted. Nora's school began at 7. The drive was 40 minutes. He would be late. He worked through his breaks to compensate, exactly as he had been doing for 4 months, and accepted that the arithmetic was the arithmetic. On Tuesday, Sloane took her second walking tour of the floor. She passed Reed again. He was checking a tablet against a row of box shipments, marking something with a pencil. She slowed without realizing she was doing it. "Mr. Price mentioned the new policy," she said, more to the air than to him. "I read it, Miss Whitfield," he said, and looked up. His expression did not shift. "It's the company's policy. That's all I have to say." Gerald appeared from the far end of the aisle within 30 seconds, as though he could hear conversations through concrete. That afternoon, while Reed was loading a truck, Trudy pulled up his name on the internal personnel screen. The lines under previous employment were brief. She opened a private browser tab and typed his name, more from instinct than suspicion. The first result was a corporate biography on the Hargrove Global website. Reed Calloway, Senior Supply Chain Systems Engineer, 12 years, designer of the Eastern routing framework that nearly every regional distributor in the Southeast was now licensed to use. There was a photograph. He was younger in it, but it was unmistakably him. Trudy sat very still for a long moment. Then she printed the page, folded it, and locked it in the bottom drawer of her desk. She tried to reach Sloane 3 more times that week. Each request was rerouted. Each call returned by an assistant. Each appointment quietly pushed back. Gerald's office was 1 floor above Sloane's. He saw the calendars, too. At home, Reed was on his knees repairing a loose porch step at Judith's house. Nora sat on the railing with a book in her lap, reading aloud from a chapter about whales. Judith brought out lemonade and watched them both with an expression she had not worn in years. Down at the corner, the street lamps came on. The following Monday brought the 3rd week of the new policy. Reed was late again. Of course he was. He was always late by the same predictable margin. Gerald walked the floor at 7:45 each morning now, clipboard in hand, recording the times himself. He did not need to be there. He wanted to be. By Friday afternoon, the file on Sloane's desk was thick. 17 separate entries, each stamped, signed, and witnessed. Reed had submitted nothing in his own defense, because Reed did not believe in defending himself with words. Sloane called him to her office. He came upstairs in his work shirt, hands clean but rough, and sat in the chair across from her without being asked. Up close he was older than she had expected. Older and quieter. His eyes did not move from her face. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I'd like to understand why you are consistently late." A pause, not theatrical, simply real. "I have a personal obligation each morning," he said. "Is it something we can work around?" "No." That was the whole sentence. She waited for more. None came. "You understand," she said carefully, "that I have a policy to enforce. The board is watching, I understand. Then help me. Give me something to work with." He looked at her for a long moment. There was no resentment in it. There was something harder than resentment. It looked almost like sympathy. "I'm not asking for an exception, Miss Whitfield. I'll accept whatever decision you have to make." He stood, thanked her, and left. She watched him go and found herself in the silence after the door closed, unable to return to her papers. She kept replaying the way he had risen without offense, as though he had stood up from 100 chairs like this one and would stand up from 100 more. Gerald walked in 20 seconds later. He had been waiting in the corridor. "You see what I mean," he said. "No cooperation, no remorse. The board will need a decision soon." "I'll have one," she said. He smiled and left. She sat at her desk for a long time after he was gone. She opened the folder and went through it page by page, each entry stamped, each time clocked to the minute. She could not find a single notation about an accommodation meeting offered, a single request for family documentation, a single line of inquiry into why this pattern existed. The file was clean. It was also, she realized, deliberately incomplete. She closed it and pushed it to the corner of her desk. That night at the small house on Maple Bend, Reed stood at the stove turning slices of grilled cheese while Nora set the table. Through the open kitchen window came Judith's voice, calling Nora over to carry a basket of cucumbers across the fence. Reed watched his daughter run across the side yard barefoot through the late summer grass, watched Judith bend and laugh, and for a moment he held the spatula completely still above the pan. Across town on the 6th floor, a light was still on. Sloane Whitfield was rereading a file she had already read 3 times, looking for something it did not contain. The termination order arrived on Sloane's desk on a Tuesday morning, attached to a memo from Gerald ending with one sentence underlined in red. If this employee is retained, the board will question the integrity of the new leadership. She read it 3 times, the 3rd time slowly. She thought about her father, who had built this company from a single rented warehouse. She thought about the board, 6 of whom had served with her father. She thought about the man in the gray work shirt who had refused to defend himself, and could not explain to herself why that refusal made the decision harder rather than easier. She signed it. The meeting was brief, 17 late arrivals, termination effective immediately. Reed did not speak, did not argue, did not flinch. When she finished reading, he stood and extended his hand. She had not expected that. She took it. His palm was warm and steady. There was a callus at the base of his thumb she felt distinctly and would remember for reasons she did not yet understand. "Thank you for the time I had here, Miss Whitfield." He walked out. In the corridor, Gerald watched him pass and let his half-smile become a full one. Reed did not turn his head. In the parking lot, Trudy was waiting beside his sedan. She held the folded printout in both hands, then thought better of it and pushed it back into her coat pocket. Some battles would have to be fought without the soldier present. "I tried," she said. "I know," Reed said. "Thank you, Trudy. What will you do?" "What I always do. Find work. There's a freight terminal off Alcoa Highway looking for a night dispatcher. I drove past their sign last week." Trudy nodded slowly. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that the terminal was paying $9 an hour to a man who had once drawn distribution lines across an entire national map. She did not say it because she knew he already knew. He drove home through the long afternoon light. When he reached the house, Nora came running out in her socks. "Dad, you're home early. Got the day off," he said, and lifted her up. He held her a beat longer than usual. She did not notice. She did not need to know. Not yet. That night he sat on the front steps and watched the street lamps come on one by one. The kitchen light at Judith's house glowed yellow through the curtains. After a while the back door opened and Judith came across the side yard with a covered bowl. "Soup," she said. "It got cold tonight." "Thank you, Judith." She did not ask why he was home in the middle of the week. She had raised a daughter who carried her grief quietly, and she could recognize that posture from 100 yards away. She pressed his shoulder once and went back inside. Reed sat with the warm bowl in his hands and did not eat for several minutes. Sunday dinner at Judith's was a Whitfield family tradition that had outlasted a husband's funeral, a daughter's rise to CEO, and the gradual disappearance of every other ritual in their lives. Sloane arrived at 6 with a bottle of wine and a tiredness she could not quite hide. Judith opened the door with her apron on. "You look like you haven't eaten all week." "I've eaten, Mom. Standing up at your desk doesn't count." They sat in the dining room with the late light coming through the lace curtains. Judith had made beef stew, the same recipe she had been preparing for 40 years. "Tell me about him again," Sloane said. Judith was happy to. She talked about how Reed had appeared at her gate with a toolbox and a quiet apology for the noise his ladder would make. How he had repaired her gutter without being asked. How his little girl Nora called her Grandma Judy, and how she had stopped correcting her after the 2nd week. How the 2 of them came to dinner on Wednesdays, and how Nora had once spent a whole rainy Saturday learning to roll pie dough in Judith's kitchen. "The poor man lost his wife 3 years ago," Judith said. "He drives that child all the way out to Oak Ridge every morning. There's an advanced program out there for children like her." He says she belongs there. Sloane went very still, 40 minutes each way. He gets up at 5:30 every single morning to do it. He told me once, very quietly, that he had been a different kind of man before his wife passed, and that this was the kind of man he wanted to be now. Sloane set her wine glass down without drinking, and then the strangest thing, Judith continued. I think he lost his job this week. He came home in the middle of the day on Tuesday and sat on the porch for the longest time. I brought him soup. He thanked me. He didn't say what had happened. Sloane set down her spoon carefully because her hand had developed a small tremor she did not want her mother to see. Are you all right, honey? I'm fine, Mom. Long week. Judith reached across the table and took her hand. Sloane let her. When she drove out of her mother's driveway later that night, Sloane did not turn right toward the highway. She turned left, rolled 50 feet down the street, and stopped at the curb. The house next door was small and tidy. A porch light burned yellow above the front door. An old gray sedan sat beside the garage. She watched a silhouette move past the front window, a man's silhouette. A child's beside it, reaching up. After 3 minutes, she put the car in gear and drove away. Monday morning, Sloane was at her office an hour before her assistant arrived. She walked past Gerald's empty floor and went directly to Human Resources. She asked, in a tone that invited no discussion, for the complete personnel file on Reed Calloway, not a summary. The complete file. The file placed in her hands was thin. The cover sheet listed previous employment in 3 bare lines, no company name carrying any real weight, no professional credentials, nothing that explained the man she had met across her desk. She called Trudy Bascom up to the executive floor. Trudy arrived still wearing her warehouse jacket and stopped just inside the door. Close it, please, Sloane said. Trudy did. Did you know, Sloane said, that I terminated Mr. Calloway last Friday? I knew. Do you have anything to tell me, Miss Bascom? That you have been trying to tell me for several weeks. Trudy reached into her coat. The folded printout, soft at the creases by now, came out in her hand. She walked it to the desk and set it down without a word. Sloane unfolded the page. She read the corporate biography from Hargrove Global. She read the title. She read the list of accomplishments. She read the line about the Eastern Routing Framework, the same framework her own father had paid Hargrove a licensing fee to use, the same framework Gerald had presented to the board last quarter as evidence of why they could never afford to compete with Hargrove directly. She looked up. Why did I not see this earlier? I tried, Miss Whitfield. 3 appointments, all canceled. I left a note at your assistant's desk. It disappeared. How? I don't know exactly, but I have a reasonable guess. Sloane folded the page and placed it on top of the personnel file. Get Mr. Price up here. Now. Gerald arrived in 5 minutes, smiling, already explaining something about quarterly variance. Sloane let him talk for 30 seconds, then slid the printout across the desk. He read it. The smile did not entirely leave his face, but it lost its conviction. He never disclosed any of this on his application, Gerald said. Did anyone ask him to? It's not the company's responsibility to verify. It was your responsibility, Gerald, to bring me complete information on a personnel matter you escalated to my desk. You brought me half a story. You knew about this, didn't you? A pause followed, one that lasted exactly long enough to be its own answer. I had my suspicions. And you sat on them. I followed procedure. You followed your own procedure. Get out of my office. He went. He closed the door with the same measured care he applied to everything, and the latch clicked quietly into place. Sloane sat for a long moment with her hand flat on the folded printout, and her eyes on the window. That evening Sloane drove back to Maple Bend. She did not park at her mother's house. She parked in front of Reed Calloway's. Through the front window she could see him at the kitchen table, Nora's homework spread out before him, a pencil in his hand. He was leaning forward to listen to something the girl was saying. He laughed at whatever it was. Sloane had never seen him laugh. The sound did not reach her through the glass, but the shape of it on his face did. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went pale, then drove home. She did not sleep. At 7 the following morning, Sloane Whitfield knocked on Reed Calloway's front door. She had not slept, and she did not pretend otherwise. He opened it in a clean shirt and jeans, a coffee mug in his hand, his expression moving through three things in 2 seconds before settling into the same steady calm she remembered from across her desk. "Miss Whitfield, I'm Judith's daughter." He did not say he had already worked that out. He simply stepped back and held the door. "Come in." The kitchen was small and warm, smelling of toast and coffee. A child's drawing was fixed to the refrigerator. A backpack with a unicorn patch sat by the door. Nora was upstairs. They could hear her singing to herself, a wandering song about a frog who lived in a teapot. "Coffee, please." He poured without speaking. The coffee was strong and plain, the kind a man makes for himself when he does not expect company. He set the mug in front of her on a simple wooden table and sat across from her with his own. "Why didn't you tell me? About Oak Ridge, about your daughter, about Hargrove? Because none of those things should have been the reason I kept my job. The rule was the rule. I was late." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. Her own thinking returned to her in a different voice. She had said almost exactly that sentence in a board meeting 6 months earlier and remembered the chairman nodding when she did. "That's exactly what I would have said. I know, and I would have been wrong." He did not answer immediately. He sat with his coffee. Above them, small feet crossed the upstairs floor. A door opened. Nora came around the corner in pajamas patterned with little planets, stopped when she saw Sloane, and smiled the way children smile before the world teaches them anything else. "This is Grandma Judy's daughter," Reed said. "Oh," Nora said, suddenly polite. "Hi, I'm Nora. Grandma Judy makes the best apple bread." Sloane laughed. The sound surprised her almost as much as it surprised Reed. She had not heard herself laugh inside someone else's home in nearly 2 years. "I know," she said. "I grew up eating it." Nora nodded as though this confirmed something significant, went to the cupboard for cereal, poured a careful amount into a yellow bowl, added milk without spilling a drop, and sat down with the easy self-possession of a child long accustomed to managing her own mornings. Sloane stayed 4 minutes longer than she had intended. When she stood to go, Reed walked her to the door. On the porch she turned. "I was wrong, Mr. Calloway. I want you to know that. I understand it was an honest mistake. It was a careless one. There's a difference." He did not argue. "I need a few days," she said. "I'm going to make this right. You don't owe me anything. I don't agree with you on that." She walked across the grass to her car. He watched her go. Behind him in the kitchen, Nora hummed something with no particular tune. From across the side yard, Judith's screen door opened. She looked toward Sloane's car, then toward Reed on the porch, and said nothing at all. She simply raised her coffee mug in his direction, the way a person offers a small, quiet blessing, and went back inside. Gerald did not wait for the second blow to fall. By that afternoon, he had called 2 board members and explained in his composed voice that the new CEO was about to reverse a clean disciplinary action due to a personal connection with the employee. He used the phrase compromised judgment. He used it twice. The emergency board meeting was set for Thursday morning. On Wednesday evening, Sloane stayed at the office until 10. Trudy stayed with her. They spread 3 years of warehouse performance data across the conference table and worked without speaking, building a picture in numbers. When they finished, they had something no clipboard discipline report could erase. Throughput in the Southern Bay had risen 23% during the months Reed Calloway had been on staff. 2 specific routing changes, both unattributed in official reports, traced back to handwritten suggestions Reed had passed up through Trudy, which Gerald had filed away without acting on and later quietly implemented under his own name. He did all of this for free on the entry shift while being marked late every morning. Trudy said it plainly. "I know," Sloane said. She drove home at midnight. She passed Maple Bend on the way and did not slow down because she did not yet have the right to stop there. Thursday morning, the boardroom on the 11th floor was full. 8 men, 1 woman, all in dark jackets, all watching the door. Gerald sat near the head of the table with his briefcase open. Sloane walked in carrying 2 folders. "Miss Whitfield," the chairman said, "Mr. Price has raised concerns about a recent personnel decision. We've agreed to hear them." "I'd like to hear them too," Sloane said. "Go ahead, Gerald." Gerald spoke for 11 minutes. He used the words compromised judgment, personal connection, and destabilizing precedent. When he finished, he closed his folder and looked at the chairman. "Thank you," Sloane said, and stood. She did not raise her voice once. "3 points," she said. First, the employee in question is Reed Calloway, formerly Senior Supply Chain Systems Engineer at Hargrove Global and designer of the Eastern Routing Framework. This company licenses for $180,000 annually. He left that position 3 years ago following the death of his wife in order to raise his daughter. A small movement around the table, shoulders straightening. Second, during his time on our entry shift, Southern Bay throughput rose 23%. The 2 routing changes responsible for that increase originated with him. Mr. Price filed them under his own initials. The original handwritten notes are in this folder. She set it on the table. Third, Mr. Price intercepted 3 separate appointment requests from his shift manager, who was trying to bring this information to my attention before the termination was finalized. He chose to bring me an incomplete file instead. He did so knowingly. She closed the second folder. I am not asking the board to reverse a decision because of a personal connection. I am asking the board to reverse a decision made on the basis of information deliberately withheld by the chief operating officer of this company. Silence. The chairman called for a vote. 7 hands rose to retain Sloane and open a formal review of Gerald Price. 1 rose in Gerald's favor. The 9th member abstained. Gerald gathered his briefcase, said nothing, and walked out past Sloane without looking at her. In the hallway, Trudy was waiting on a bench by the elevators. Sloane stepped out and nodded once. Trudy exhaled the breath she had been holding for an hour. That evening, Sloane stood at the window of her 6th-floor office and looked down at the parking lot. The visitor spaces were empty. The space where Reed's gray sedan used to sit, 3 rows back, was empty too. She watched it for a long time. On Saturday morning, she drove to Maple Bend with an envelope in her coat pocket. Reed answered the door in a flannel shirt and bare feet. From across the side yard came the sound of Nora and Judith laughing in the vegetable garden. "Come in," he said. "I won't stay long." He waited. She took the envelope from her pocket and set it on the kitchen table between them. "This is an offer letter. Supply chain director, reporting directly to me. Salary on the 2nd page. Hours are flexible. Start as late as 9. Leave by 4. Work the rest from home when you need to. There is no probationary period. There is no reference to previous discipline. The disciplinary record from your time here has been removed from your file as of yesterday morning. Mr. Price no longer has access to personnel files of any kind." Picked up the envelope. He did not open it immediately. He looked at it. "Miss Whitfield, I don't need pity. This isn't pity. It sounds like it. It's the offer I should have made the first time you came to my office. I didn't make it then because I didn't have all the facts. I have them now. I'm not going to apologize for offering you a position you can do better than anyone else in the building. If you don't want it, say no. But don't call it pity." He looked up. Something in his eyes shifted. "Very small," she saw it. "I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking." At the porch step she stopped. "Thank you for the coffee the other morning," she said. "Anytime." She walked across the lawn. At the picket fence, Judith looked up and raised muddy gloves in her direction. "Sloane Whitfield, are you leaving without saying hello?" "No, Mom." "Then come over here and admire my squash." Sloane glanced back at Reed. He was watching from the porch, the envelope still in his hand. He gave her a small nod. She walked through the gate. Half an hour later, Judith made the decision for everyone. "You are all staying for lunch. Reed, bring the bread. Nora, set the table. Sloane, wash your hands. You've been touching dirt." They sat 4 at the small kitchen table. Nora told a long story about a frog the gifted program had brought into the classroom, how the frog had a name and the name was Cornelius, and Cornelius had eaten 3 crickets in a single day. Judith laughed at the right moments. Reed passed the salt without being asked. Sloane reached for the bread basket at the same moment Reed did. Their hands met above it and stopped. Neither moved for a full second. Then Reed said, "After you." And she said, "Thank you." The moment passed without comment, but neither of them quite forgot it. After the dishes were cleared, Reed sat on the back porch with the envelope in his lap. Judith brought him coffee, stood beside him for a moment without speaking, looked out at the garden, squeezed his shoulder the way she had the night the soup got cold, and went back inside. Through the window, Sloane was at the sink washing a serving bowl. She had taken off her watch and set it on the sill. Reed looked at her for a moment through the screen, then opened the envelope and began to read. 2 weeks later, Reed arrived at the Whitfield Logistics building at 8:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before his start time. Trudy was at the front desk. When she saw him, she clapped once, very quietly to herself, like someone witnessing a small private miracle. In the first 30 days under his redesign, the routing system in the South Bay cut average pick time by another 9%. By the end of the second month, 2 new distribution contracts were signed with regional partners who had not previously trusted Whitfield's reach. The board sent Sloane a memo thanking her for her leadership in personnel matters. Gerald Price was offered a non-voting advisory seat with no operational authority. He kept it for 8 weeks, and then resigned without saying goodbye on his way out. The routine that grew up in the months that followed was a quiet one. Sunday dinners at Judith's became a standing arrangement. Sloane began arriving an hour early to help in the kitchen. Reed and Nora came at 6. Sometimes he brought bread, sometimes a pie. Nora called Sloane Miss Sloane for the first 3 Sundays and then simply Sloane, without anyone asking her to change. At work, neither of them mentioned the porch or the bread basket. They held meetings in conference rooms with the door open and sent emails copied to the whole department. By every visible measure, they were a CEO and her director. One Tuesday night in late October, Sloane was leaving the office at 8 when she noticed the light still on in Reed's office. He was at his desk leaning over a printed network map of the southern routes. She paused in the doorway. Long day, long day. She went down to the lobby coffee machine, made 2 cups and brought them back. She set one on his desk and turned to go. At the door she stopped. He stood. They walked together to the wide glass on the north wall and looked out over the lights of Knoxville under a clear, cold sky. They stood close, not touching, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his shoulder beside hers. "My mother told me last weekend," Sloane said, "that you are very kind. Your mother is a generous woman, she is, but she is also rarely wrong." A pause. "She told me when I was 22 that I was very much my father's daughter. I didn't believe her then. Now I'm starting to." Outside, a small plane crossed the dark sky and blinked once, twice. Reed did not turn to look at her. She did not turn to look at him. They stood watching the city, both fully aware of the other's breathing. "Reed." "Yes." "Thank you for taking the job. Thank you for offering it twice." That was the whole conversation. Neither of them had been looking, not for forgiveness, not for a second chance, certainly not for each other. But somewhere between a broken porch step and a Sunday dinner table, between a folded page in a drawer and an envelope in a coat pocket, between a child's open question and a mother's quiet remark over a bowl of beef stew, that was exactly what they had found. Outside the window, the lights of Knoxville went on burning. Inside, the 2 of them stood together in the quiet and did not move for a long time.